Today, we're speaking with Carrie Radomski. Carrie is a geoscientist, writer, artist, real estate agent, miner. Yes, the kind that goes looking for gold in the Yukon. And yes, she's also the kind of miner that uses GPUs to solve cryptic algorithms, president and board member of the Lifespan Society of British Columbia, and much more. She's a real Renaissance woman. Carrie has been involved with the life extension of Cryonics endeavor for almost a decade, and more recently, she's been turning her attention to issues around rapid response, namely making it more rapid, particularly in Canada. So, without further ado, we bring you Carrie Radomski. Carrie Radomski, welcome to the Cryonics Underground podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it. I'm actually a big fan of your podcast. I've managed to listen to most episodes, especially since I lost use of my eyes because I had PRK laser eye surgery. So I literally couldn't do anything except lay down and listen to podcasts. And I was listening to like many episodes of Cryonics Underground, and also I was listening to just one episode, a really long episode of Lex Friedman's interview with the CEO and founder of DeepMind, which I found really fascinating as well.
Awesome. Well, I hope I hope our podcasts, either if you were looking for something to put you to sleep, I hope it did that. If not, I hope it, energized you, whatever you were looking for from our many conversations. I hope they fulfilled that need. I want to start with I want to start by sort of asking the big picture question about Carrie Radomski, which is, what is it that got you sort of interested in life extension, cryonics, the kind of big questions that these fields bring up? Was this and when did this interest start? Was this something that started, back in college? Before that, after that, what is something you read? Tell us a little bit about that history.
Maybe I should start from the beginning. I guess I've often wondered this about myself, because when I look at my own life and my own belief system, I just find myself being like very much a contrarian or kind of dissident personality. And I've always wondered, how come I didn't turn out differently? And I sort of look at my family history. My great grandmother refused to bind her feet. That was like a cultural, very dissident behavior from a woman. My grandmother and my mother were also political dissidents against the Communist Party, and they actually left the country of China to come to Canada to seek out a new life and to live with more personal freedoms, just because their family was kind of, what's the word for it? It wasn't exactly like, I guess they were persecuted for their political beliefs. They used to be landowners, so that was taken. And there was this sort of cultural revolution where they sent the children of farmers to the schools, and then the children of intellectuals to the farms. So my mother was actually sent to the farms to work. And she was terrible at that job, because that's not how, this is not her background. She was from a more academic background. And there was a lot of inconveniences in life, and, they lost a lot of their accumulated wealth over the years. So they came to Canada with very little because of that.
So did they come during towards the end of the Cultural Revolution?
Yeah, towards the end, in the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so already your family were pioneers, willing to, they're the kind of people that are willing to travel, willing to step out of their comfort zone in order to start a new life and change things. That sort of, I think that spirit is certainly part of what makes us cryonicists and into life extension. But so would you say that impetus, that whatever it was built into your family was kind of translated to you, and that's what helped
Yes, I
inspire
think
you
so,
to?
because in my teens, I was interested in libertarianism, like anarchy. I identified as an anarchist, as sort of like a punk or goth or something person. And I was just like, fight the system and let's overthrow the government. And I just spent a lot of my time, being interested in politics and philosophy. And it was kind of weird because most people, they pick like, conservatism or liberalism, or they try to work within the system, but I was just trying to overthrow the system. And there was something inside of me that just like pushed me towards this. And I don't really know why. I don't know if it's rationality or some sort of impulse, like some sort of like deeper impulse that I can't explain.
When you
Um,
say you were interested, you were sort of an anarchist, would you say at that point you were an ANCAP, an anarcho-capitalist, or did the capitalism come later and the anarchism came sooner
yeah, I was definitely an ANCAP.
from
I
the
guess
start?
I
Okay.
brainwashed myself on the internet because I just read like all the philosophy of ANCAP philosophy and a few of the books. It's been a long time, but I suppose I was also interested by the work of Ayn Rand. I was influenced by her thinking. I don't really identify with that philosophy at the moment, but at the time I was influenced by it. And I was also part of the like the strong atheism movement on YouTube. So I forget that what was that strong atheist? There was a bunch of strong atheists on YouTube discussing or arguing against theism philosophically.
Do,
So I was part
do
of
you
that.
do you mean like the new atheists, like in like the
Yeah, the
mid
new
two
atheist
thousands?
movement.
Yeah, yeah. So like
Yeah.
the Dennett and Dawkins and Hitchens, that crowd. And
Yeah, I was like an adherent of new atheism. Yeah, I
yeah,
thought
yeah.
the problem of the world was irrational religious beliefs. So I just really strongly identified with rationalism as a philosophy and worldview and
And do you
practice.
still feel that way, by the way, or have you sort of lightened up on that front and feel like that's not inherently the center or piece of all the of so many of the world's ills?
Yeah, I used to think that irrationality was the source of evil, but now I don't have that strong of a belief. I think that actually religion can influence people to be better people and could potentially stabilize society. Um, so I don't have that belief, a strong belief anymore. So
Now, given that a lot of chronicists also kind of share this contrarian worldview, do you think that cryonics itself is kind of like the on the pyramid of a contrarian worldview? Do you think chronicists have reached the pinnacle? Is there anywhere left to go? First not happy with the government and not happy with a lot of and religion and how things are run, and now we are just literally no death. We want to live forever. This feels like I don't see where else we can go from here. We are being the ultimate contrarians, trying
yes,
to
I've
cheat
actually thought about
death.
this. I've thought about this a lot. I said, well, nothing feels edgier than being an anarchist or a cryonicist or something that's just like widely, kind of overlooked by society or despised by society. I suppose I was also a long time ago, I was a voluntary human extinctionist. I thought that was like the best method of achieving, a greener world.
Can you describe? I
Okay,
I can
so
piece together what that means, kind of, but I'm curious in your own words what that means.
okay, so basically, humanity causes the ecosystem to collapse and has accelerated the extinction of various animal species. So the most peaceful thing to do that's, most morally correct is simply to stop reproducing and die out in order to
That's like a complete 180 from cryonics. Now it's like we want to preserve yourself indefinitely versus extinct yourself. That is quite a
yeah, so I
turnaround.
reject that worldview now. Just because I think that I just sort of put our beings on a more like I have a hierarchical moral system now because humanity is able to prevent like total extinction events for the entire world. Like we're able to most obvious example is potentially deflect an asteroid that would wipe out all life on planet Earth. And also I read some additional information about the Great Filter, and I read some of Robin Hansen's work, and watch some YouTube videos about it. And our universe is kind of silent. Everywhere we look appears to be dead. There's non-conscious matter everywhere, and that outnumbers our fleeting living existence. Like, there's non-existence for like billions of years, and then suddenly there's life. And to me, that's a miracle and worth preserving. Consciousness is a miracle worth preserving, and to me, that's the highest priority, to preserve consciousness of conscious beings.
What do you feel brought you to that conclusion and away from your previous conclusion? Was it philosophy courses? Was it books you read? Just sort of maturing as you got older? What do you think it was?
I think it was maturing as I got older, because I realized that we can propagate more life on different planets. So we can expand life, to different, planets and solar systems and the universe itself. Just because we took a look around, we should be seeing other signs of intelligent life or life at all. And we just see a void. There's absolutely doesn't appear to be anything out there as far as the eye can see. So that's sort of scary, because why is there no other life? Like, why are we not detecting any sort of radio signal or any kind of indication that there would be some life out there? So
this is a bit of an aside, but have you heard of the dark forest hypothesis or explanation for this?
Yeah, I think I read that in the past. I wouldn't be able to summarize it, but I did come across that.
It's basically that the reason we don't hear or see any extraterrestrial life out there is because they're all the ones that do exist are very, very quiet. They've learned to, or by random chance, they just happen to be species which, even though they're intelligent, don't send out radio signals or other signs that they're around, because the ones that did or do, the moment they do or start doing so, or shortly thereafter, they are predated upon by dangerous alien life, which the moment it sees any kind of other aliens out there will go and destroy them, because if they don't, that alien life may become a potential threat to them in the future. So the alien life that does exist has learned to be very quiet. So it's a dark, they call it the dark forest, because the forest is of course full of life, but all of it is and it tries to be very quiet, because the first one to make a noise is going to be eaten. So of course, according to this theory, we're already doing some damage to ourselves here by sending out as much as we are. But that cat is out of the bag. That is now what it is. So we just have to hope that that's the wrong idea of what's going on in the universe.
I mean, that is definitely a valid hypothesis, and obviously we don't know, and there's still a lot to explore. So
yeah, always good to start the podcast with alien extinction and give all the listeners something to really worry about in case they weren't worried enough about modern
Daniel,
events.
your paranoia is going to come through here. I can see you're already sweating about when the aliens are going to come and destroy us.
We're gonna whisper for the rest of the podcast so they can't hear us.
Yeah. So say everything in hushed tones. Maybe the EM signals won't make it out. So do you feel, Carrie, that your background, for example, I believe you have a background in philosophy, an undergrad at least in philosophy, and other things like that. Do you feel like any of that background kind of helped steer you towards cryonics, or at least kind of, or maybe all it did was reinforce what you were already developing naturally into it, and helped you say, yes, this is for all the reasons that I can fathom and think about philosophically or otherwise, it seems like a good idea.
Yes, actually I got interested in life extension before I was interested in cryonics, but I didn't really see my life centering around these topics. I did watch Aubrey de Grey's first TED Talk, and he talked about how we should cure aging. And to me, that just made the most logical sense. He outlined, potential mechanisms for aging, and he pointed out that many of the diseases that we pour, most of society's resources into are actually caused by aging. So the number one killer of people is, cardiovascular disease. Well, why does that come about? Because of aging. Why does cancer come about? Because of aging. So why don't we just attack the root cause of all these diseases that kill us instead of, spending another $1 trillion on trying to cure the diseases after we develop them? Why not just, stop aging so that we don't develop those diseases in the first place? It just made, the most logical sense. So it was very, whenever I was exposed to this belief or these beliefs, I would just adopt them immediately. I said, oh, absolutely. Curing aging is extremely important, and more people should be working on it. There should be more resources dedicated towards this endeavor.
So we're going to hammer you a little bit more on the subject of life extension versus cryonics, because I think even from a cultural perspective, for example, the differences between the two and the differences of thought between the two, and not just the similarities as we're describing. But before we get there, I wanted to ask you, I know that you also have a background in geology, is that right?
Yes, I worked in the mining industry for a few years.
So in the actual mining industry. And I was thinking about this, and it seemed to me, I have a theory. So you can tell me whether it makes sense or holds water or not, which is that geology, just like cosmology and astronomy, is one of these subjects where people have to think on very long time horizons, right? Time horizons that we're not used to fathoming as human beings, right? We're not evolved to think about time horizons having to do with even thousands of years, let alone millions of years, let alone billions of years, as one does when one is thinking about all the layers of the earth and all the rocks and how all those things have developed over the eons. So is there some connection between a person who is comfortable thinking about geology, thinking about these long time horizons, these spans of history as you have on geological time, and somebody who's able to think about very long-term horizons in other aspects, like, for example, life extension, cryonics, these kinds of things that make one think, okay, humans really could live very long times. An individual human life even could extend for far beyond what it is now. It seems to me like there's a connection here.
There is some kind of connection. I think that to be like a futurist and visionary and to be a pioneer, you have to understand both the past and also be able to project into the future. So I would say the field of geology, you look at, the history of the planet Earth, and you understand really large timescales. We're just the tiniest veneer, in the history of the planet, the mammals. And, for billions of years, there's just some rocks and some volcanoes and then maybe cellular life. And then at some point we made the leap between single cell and multi-cell, but for a very long time, it was just single cell organisms. So I would say that, I did a geology program at UBC. I graduated with honors. I was a very, diligent student, and I started off my career pretty good, but I was quite different from the other geologists. I didn't have a lot of the same interest. I was very strange. I guess I was just very interested in, the future, and I was interested in rocks and the future, but I didn't really meet many geologists who were interested in the far future, or,
it's only the distant past, but not the far future.
Yes, I would say that was the case. So I did work as an exploration geologist, and I worked in the Yukon for 3 years, 3 summers.
Now, so in that experience, so you did gold exploration, you said. So when I hear the term gold explorer, I'm just imagining you walking like by a river in California with a pickaxe, slung over your shoulder. And I'm sure it's very different in real
No,
world
that's
practice.
exactly how it is.
Oh,
Like I would
really?
just have a rock hammer on my back, and I would be collecting rock samples. I had a Tilly hat,
Okay.
wearing boots, and
I for sure thought that it was that stereotype in my mind was just completely fabricated, but I now trust my instincts on these things a little bit more. Could you give us some interesting Snapple facts or fun stories in the world of gold exploration in the Yukon or anywhere else for that matter?
okay. I guess one of the most interesting things about the far north is the phenomena where in the summer the sun doesn't set. So you have this midnight sun effect where there's one day where there's 24-hour sunlight, which is pretty crazy. The sun doesn't set because of the angle of the planet relative to the sun.
Yeah, it's got to play havoc with your circadian rhythm.
Yeah, we had blackout blinds, so I was okay, but for a lot of people it wasn't. It was very like strange for their circadian rhythm, as you put it. And also there's a lot of really old towns that haven't really changed. They tried to just preserve it since the 1800s. So it'd be like walking onto, a Best Western, like a cowboy movie set or something like that. It would actually be like that. There'd be like saloons, and they just tried to keep everything historic.
And what would what was day-to-day living like in that field?
There's isolation. Obviously, we still have internet, but if you're in a mining camp, you're sort of in the mountains with helicopter access only. They drop in water and food and supplies. And as an exploration geologist, sometimes they would just drop you off on a mountain for the entire day where you'd be on your own. And you had bear spray, and you just had to keep yourself organized and safe and not fall off a cliff or mess up your situation. Don't get eaten by a bear, So
Is this something that now that you're a cryonicist, you would find to be too risky?
probably, I would say it was kind of a more dangerous line of work. There's just things when you work in mining, it's just more dangerous of a job. Every couple of years I would hear about, a geologist crashing in a small plane or helicopter and dying basically. So that was definitely something that happens to people.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not exactly an easy place for SSO to get to you.
No,
Or SST rather. It's like be able to get to, yeah.
Yeah, if you pass away there, you'd be done for. Like, there's no way.
Yeah. As an aside, I've always been nervous about helicopters. You know anything about? It feels like anytime I hear about some type of aerial crash, it's always with a helicopter, and not nearly as much with planes. Is that? Would that be correct, or would you even know?
Yeah, I would say that helicopters are not as safe as planes, but when you're flying small planes in the far north, that has a much higher fatality rate than a commercial jet.
I'm assuming that's just due to the fact that there's it's a less professional operation and there's not as much on the line with a individual
Yeah,
pilot.
there's not exactly air traffic control, and you get these crappy little runways, and then the weather pattern might not be understood, and also the pilots tend to be younger because you have to, live and work remotely. So if you're a pilot that has more experience, you probably just prefer to live in the city and be close to family. So a lot of the pilots, I would say, are younger and don't have a family and have fewer, obligations.
Those kinds of airplanes, when there's a problem, they're also flying a lot closer to the ground, so they have less of a chance to sort of deal with the problem before the ground kind of reaches them. And large commercial jets have many redundancies built in. For example, multiple engines. So even if you have a single engine failure, you have another engine at least to be able to get you to where you need to go. They have multiple redundancies in other systems as well, and power and communications and all this. So yeah, a big jet is a lot safer than a small engine, than a small plane.
Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, a few years back, I heard of somebody I went to school with in the same program. She died in a Cessna crash. It was actually a big tragedy. She was a very great scientist and geologist and honors student as well. So that actually like upsets me thinking about that because I forgot about that. But
well, we'll move along then. Going on to a little bit more about your interests. I know you dabble in the crypto space, which is not uncommon for many cryonicists. Is there anything interesting or relevant there that you could share?
So there was a gold crash in 2012, 2013. I lost my job as an exploration geologist, and everybody I knew was laid off. So I had to find something else to do. So I joined a cryptocurrency mining startup, and I set up mining rigs for a Litecoin mining operation. So that's around the time I made some investments into Bitcoin.
Okay. And given that many Bitcoin enthusiasts believe that Bitcoin will replace gold as a store of value, with your having straddled these two worlds, do you believe there's any relationship between your interest in gold exploration and the fact that you got interested in Bitcoin right after?
I'm not sure. I think it was just an opportunity because I was in the libertarian and anarchist circles, and all the anarchists and libertarians wanted to adopt Bitcoin to overthrow the fiat system, which they believe had enslaved society. And I actually still kind of agree with them about that. So so that's why I got interested in Bitcoin.
Do you think it's still likely to happen, or we're not going to see that anytime soon?
I'm not sure. I've become a lot more agnostic. I mean, I used to be a Bitcoin maximalist. I used to think that was the only and best cryptocurrency, but ever since I missed a boat with Ethereum, I'm sort of like second guessing my judgment, because I realized that there could be something on the horizon, in the future that might be better than Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin transactions are quite slow and they're quite costly. There's a lot of things that could be better in a currency, in a digital currency. So
okay, well, I'll hesitate my instinct to lecture about the
I know that
second layer Bitcoin.
Yeah, okay.
world.
So maybe the Lightning Network will fix everything, but like really, I mean, as just a store of value, even if it just replaced the market cap of gold, it would still be worth like, I don't know, like $1 million per Bitcoin. So maybe it's still undervalued because it's certainly more practical to store Bitcoin than it is to store gold. So maybe it is, fundamentally.
And you don't have to go to the Yukon to get it.
Yeah.
that might be a negative rather than a positive. I mean, if Carrie really enjoyed, fighting the bears and taking the helicopter rides, Bitcoin miners never get to do that real mining.
Max, I have a very delicate and sensitive circadian rhythm, and I can't have it disturbed by 24-hour sun cycles. So I'm gonna stick with the Bitcoin on this.
Yeah, I actually have a funny story about the Yukon. So there's this far north city called Dawson City, and that's where they had the boardwalks, the saloons. It looks like a set from 1800s Western movie. And there's something called the sourdough. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And basically somebody, I think about 30 years ago, there's a Yukoner, a prospector who had lost his toe due to frostbite. So he kept it in a whiskey bottle or something like that. He just kept it preserved in a whiskey bottle. And then he came up with this insane idea to sell this drink that's basically alcohol from the bottle with his toe in it. And they called that the sourdough. And that kind of really caught on in that city. So people would pay to drink this drink that had this human toe in it.
That is disgusting.
Were there a lot of people walking around that town, like, poorly, not walking very well because they were missing all their toes because they sold them to this toe market?
So it was sort of like the original toe was actually swallowed by accident,
Ooh.
allegedly.
Hmm.
So then other townspeople would donate their toes. Like after they would pass away, they would donate their toes to be part of, just to continue the tradition of sourdough.
Ooh.
So when I was living there with the rest of my coworkers, I heard about this and I thought it was like the best thing ever. I said, I'm going to do it, as soon as I can. I'm going to do it. My birthday's coming up. I'm going to have a few drinks. I'm going to go do it. I was the first person in the company to do it. But after that, everyone wanted to try it.
Wait,
Just
to
so they could
provide a
get-
toe or to drink the drink?
Drink the drink.
Oh, you okay?
Hmm.
You weren't going to give up a toe. Okay.
No,
got it.
of course not. I'm not interested in donating.
I don't know. Really get into it over there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I said, well, this is the day. So, and apparently it doesn't count if the toe doesn't touch your lip. So it's in your cup,
Mm.
right? So I was like, oh, okay. So I drank the entire drink and the toe was actually just at the bottom of my glass and it didn't touch my lips. So I had to like tap it for this thing to actually like touch my lips so I could say I did it, right?
And so
was it like
it did touch your lips, though.
Yeah, it did.
Did it? And
It did.
describe
It was like-
the feel. What is
It
it?
was
What does the toe taste like?
It wasn't really much of a toe anymore. It was just some wrinkled black
Oh.
thing.
Oh,
that had
that's so
been
much
in a
worse.
glass
That's so
of
much worse.
salt.
Was there like a nail still on it?
No, the nail had dissolved like quite a long time
Ooh.
ago. I'm sure of that.
Could you tell if it was the big toe or like the pinky toe?
The big
What-
toe.
the big.
toe,
Where they're always
yes.
they're always big toes. Okay.
Yes, they're always big toes.
Eh,
I think the little toes are a little bit more dangerous because I feel like more people would accidentally swallow them. So
Mm. Yeah, toes are choking hazard. I would imagine. How would you describe the taste of a human toe? I mean,
it had been
if it-
soaking in like alcohol for like quite a long time. There's no taste involved. Like the nail had dissolved, probably the bone had dissolved in the whiskey and the salt that it's kept in. I mean, it's obviously a kind of disgusting looking.
There's a bunch of people who are just returning after running to the bathroom to vomit from when you first mentioned it.
Yeah. If anybody ever complains about
Uh,
like eating bugs or something in the future, it'd be like, actually, this culture has produced something even more interesting.
Carrie, this now has to become like the title of this podcast episode. It's going to be the
sourdough?
sourdough. Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually a book
Carrie
about it.
Radomski
Yeah.
sourdough.
Yeah, I just thought it was like the most interesting thing and cool thing. It was like an event, just because it was so weird. I just really liked it. And also to like kind of show off, your bravado because you're in mining and everyone's kind of rough around the edges. So
That is until now. From what we just said, I said that cryonics was the pinnacle of contrarianism. It's actually that. It's whiskey toes because I wouldn't do that. But that's so funny. I was not expecting to get that great of a story when I asked you for interesting stories. So you have seriously surprised me. And I don't know how to transition from this.
yeah.
I'll do my best to take us from drinking sour toes to the Lifespan Society. So, Carrie, you are the president, I think, right? President of the Lifespan Society of British Columbia.
Mhm.
What is the Lifespan Society of British Columbia?
The Lifespan Society is a nonprofit organization incorporated in British Columbia, Canada. It's the first radical life extension nonprofit incorporated in Canada. So our mission is to promote radical life extension technology, including cryonics. And that's part of our mission and part of our incorporation documents.
And if I remember correctly, the founder was Keegan McIntosh.
Yes, Keegan McIntosh. So I actually signed up for cryonics back in 2014. So I signed up when I was 25. So I was a young cryonicist. And I thought about, basically when I signed up, I thought it was the best idea ever. And it just made sense to me immediately because Keegan McIntosh was delivering a talk at UBC, where I went to university, and a friend who was going to law school with Keegan and thought that I would be interested in this event. So she invited me to this talk, and I suppose that sort of set up, I guess, probably the next period of my life. because I started getting more and more involved in cryonics. And, I guess 10 years later now, I see my life as dedicated towards improving cryonic standby. So that's one of my life's missions, to improve cryonic standby in BC and maybe the entirety of Canada. But we'll start with BC first.
And within the Lifespan Society, I know it's partially longevity, partially cryonics. How would you describe the ratio of cryonicists to longevity enthusiasts?
So we have 5 board members, and 4 of them are long-term cryonicists. So I want to focus more on cryonics. So I've hired a student intern to do more of the life extension stuff.
And do you find that the life extension becomes a natural stepping stone, like it did for you and myself in cryonics? And do you encourage that among your members who are there not for cryonics but for longevity?
Yes. So I actually, 10 years ago, I thought that we might be able to reach longevity escape velocity, but things are moving slower than I would like them to move. So at this point in time, I could be wrong. I don't think we're going to make it. I think that we may be one of the last generations to die, which is kind of sad for us, but it's actually great for humanity. I mean, that if that's the case, then we've been doing really well. Like if we're one of the last generations to die. But the idea that nobody in the century would make it in the future is very like tragic to me. Like if nobody from the 21st century made it, like we're just right on the cusp. We're like, oh, we're the last generation to die. Nobody made it. That bothers me. I don't know if that would bother a lot of people, but that personally bothers me.
And have you had any success? And if you have, what strategies were effective in converting people primarily interested in longevity towards cryonics as a kind of a primary focus instead?
I'm actually not sure. So because our organization has a little bit more visibility, I think it's easier to find us, just because there's a lot more people interested in life extension than cryonics. But the people that do actually reach out to the Lifespan Society of BC is through cryonics because of our legal activism.
And now a little bit later, I definitely want to deep dive into one of the legal challenges the Lifespan Society was involved in. But putting that on the back burner for now, I just want to talk a little bit about the day-to-day logistics of the Lifespan Society. So if we were going to take us on a walk at the ground level on what would it look like on a day-to-day level running the organization?
So back in 2012, it was created and incorporated by Keegan McIntosh, and actually most of the people on the board today were on the board back then as well. So my husband was on the board. His name is Vitek, and Soleil was also on the board. He's a longtime Alcor member as well. And I guess Victor didn't come in until 2014, but he's been on the board for a long time as well. At the time in 2012, 2013, I was just joining the events, and I started volunteering at the Lifespan Society. So I was the event coordinator. So we'd have one movie night every month, and we'd have one hike or walk every month. So we'd have 2 events per month, and I would do a write-up on each event. And then we would occasionally organize larger conferences. So I'm the main conference organizer for our biggest longevity conference in 2014, where we had Aubrey DeGray as our keynote speaker. And actually Ben Best also spoke at our conference. And there's Parijata Maki, and she spoke about supercentenarians. And we had a SFU professor speak about supercentenarians as well. And that was pretty well attended. I had about 120 people. And we were just a very small, volunteer organization. I was being paid part-time for my organizational role in conference planning and stuff, but nobody was on full-time. It's just a volunteer organization.
And do you guys have any primary funding source? I know and we can get into this later as well, that Bill Falloon helped with the Life Extension Foundation help fund one of the legal challenges. Are they contributor generally speaking?
Yeah, so LEF, Life Extension Foundation, was our main donor. So they gave a good chunk of money to Keegan to create the Lifespan Society and also to mount this charter challenge against the Canadian government for their anti-cryonics law.
And in terms of just general issues you guys have, could you tell me anything about some, again, without not necessarily the main legal challenge, but in the past, what kind of setbacks have you dealt with? What were some of the primary challenges you had going forward with daily activities or anything?
There's no challenges with our daily activities surrounding the Lifespan Society, because we're just an education and advocacy organization. But there were issues with cryonicists creating funeral arrangements, because CI members they don't have standby coverage. There's no team that's going to come get them if they die. So they have to have funeral arrangements. So a lot of funeral directors would not want to work with cryonicists because of these anti-cryonics laws on the books. So in 1990, in the Cemetery Interment Funeral Services Act, they passed a law that restricted and prohibited the sale or offer for sale of cryonics on the expectation of resuscitation in the future. So
yeah, if we can expand more on that. I know it didn't make cryonics outright illegal, that bill, but it threatened it, or kind of purposely hindered it.
Threatened cryonics arrangements being made, because you cannot offer for sale or potentially sell cryonics arrangement. But the way the law was written was very unclear. So when a funeral director, they look at this as their legal guidance, and they see this, they don't want to take that risk with the CI members. So Ben Best actually rang the alarm bell like pretty early on in 1991. He started trying to send letters and make phone calls to figure out why this law came about, who was responsible, and I was never able to, figure out like why they did it and who did it back then. So we're probably not going to figure it out now, 30 years later. So
if do you have any theories about why? Maybe the funeral industry, a religious group, a disgruntled cryonics family member? If you had to guess or put a wager on, because it could obviously wouldn't randomly come into existence unless someone lobbied for it in some way. So how would you guess if you had to?
I wish I could speak more to that, but it's just a complete mystery. Like there wasn't any active lawsuit or case at the time, so I can't really think of somebody. And also funeral directors, I don't think that they would be against that, because they often take the attitude of just fulfilling people's last wishes, and why would they get involved with that and trying to introduce more laws for their own industry? It just seems like it just seems like against their self-interest to want to introduce something like that. So
and could you walk us through, so from the time that this bill came out to the time that it got on your radar and Bill Falloon's radar, tell us more about the details of how you challenged this law and anything in regards to that whole process.
So obviously I came in, after 2012. So this law had been on the books for already 30 years. So, and in the past, cryonicists have written letters to the NDP, the local government, written laws to the registrar and to the Association of Funeral Directors, and they would receive, the occasional email or something saying, oh, this law doesn't prohibit funeral directors from, shipping people on ice, just as long as people purchase their cryonics arrangements with a US company we don't really see this being an issue for the funeral directors. And then there would be certain funeral directors willing to work with CI members. So then that would be good enough. But then for Bill Falloon, he has fought legal battles in multiple countries against anti-cryonics and anti-life extension laws, because he doesn't want other jurisdictions looking at our legal framework and using that to prohibit cryonics activities, because he has personally gone to jail or his associates have gone to jail because it was against the law or something, or they decided to interpret the law to be against cryonics even when it wasn't. So
Yeah.
he's just very careful about that.
I think he talked a bunch about that at the Alcor 50 conference, about some of the legal challenges he had with the FDA and some legal challenges in, I think it was New Zealand, for some of the cryonics laws there that he won. We're hoping to have him on some point in the future in the podcast as well, because I know he's extremely important in the industry. Now, so since that law was put in place, and people had no choice but to go or utilize American cryonics service organizations, do you think that prevented any Native Canadian cryonics service organizations from popping up? Did it create some type of a great cryo migration to the United States?
I don't think so. Because there are certain funeral directors that have decided to work with cryonicists, so that hasn't been an issue, but it could have become an issue. And I guess it is still an issue for some cryonicists. There's one that's sort of outside the downtown area of Vancouver. He's sort of a little further out, and he can't seem to get a funeral director in his area that wants to work with him because of this law. So it's still affecting certain cryonicists.
So when you say because of this law, so was it not fully undone? What is the legal challenge? Did you win the legal challenge? And
I would say it's a limited victory. So we started, so the government, I'm going to use the word the Crown because that's the proper legal term. So just think of that as the government. So we filed a civil claim against the Crown in 2014, and they tried to dismiss it multiple times, saying that, it's not our job to interpret the law for you. So then we decided to actually, we tried to get clarification by filing this civil claim, and they rejected it based on the fact that there wasn't anything actually being done. They said, well, you're not actually providing cryonic services, so why are you bothering us, basically. Obviously, there's lots of legal jargon and documentation, but that's the, in a nutshell version. So what we did was we actually created a cryonics arrangement, a cryonics standby arrangement between the Lifespan Society and Keegan McIntosh. So at that point, I took over the organization, and Keegan was a Lifespan member. So we offered the cryonic services to him, and he signed the contract. So we are actually in a contract with Keegan McIntosh to provide cryonic standby services to him. So we actually decided to challenge the law by breaking it. And we sent another notice of civil claim saying that we had done this with the cryonics agreement. And they said that what Lifespan is doing is not breaking this law. And they said that Keegan is a well-informed consumer, and we don't need to protect him from his own decisions. However, they said it's not in the public interest to, litigate against us, but then we don't want to change the law either. So
does this kind of limited Pyrrhic victory? So essentially, it sounds like they're saying we don't want to deal with it. Like, we just don't care enough to deal with it. Does that create any precedent going forward that would help any new organizations that popped up, or would they have to relitigate everything again, or is this victory limited to the the Lifespan Society specifically and Keegan, or does it have a kind of a broader purview?
So this victory is limited to the Lifespan Society only. They're saying that the Life Science Society has not broken the law, so we see this as sort of a go-ahead that we can provide standby and cryonic services, but they want to reserve the right to litigate against other organizations who they may see as a consumer threat in some way. So they're
And did
mostly
they-
concerned with people approaching, old folks' home and trying to, get money out of them, basically people that may be elderly and not 100% competent.
So we won't really know how this is going to pan out until there's a broader challenge that's dealt with in the courts at some point.
Yes, part of the reason we went the civil route is because we didn't have the budget for a charter challenge. Like for you guys, it would be a constitutional challenge. Like going to that high of a court would cost more. So we sort of worked within our budget to achieve what we could achieve with the budget that we had. So
if any wealthy Canadian cryonicists are listening, would it be fair to say that if there was a large enough donation that challenge could be fought?
I think that at this time, I would want to just completely circumvent the funeral service industry if possible, and just try to go the whole body donation route, and just sort of hire lawyers to see how we can go down that route. Because the Cemetery Interment Funeral Services Act does mostly govern the funeral service industry. So it would make sense that, our small nonprofit wouldn't be the main targets of this law anyways. I think they would take more issue with a funeral home actually offering these services.
Now, as a general issue for Canadians seeking chronic services in the United States, what are some of the challenges and pitfalls they might encounter, whether it be transportation or getting the right permits or any type of immigration issues? What kind of things pop up there for them?
Okay, this is opening a can of worms. Okay, so there's an issue with transporting cryonics equipment across the border and doing cases in Canada potentially. They were supposed to send a full Alcor standby kit to Ottawa, and it got seized at the border. So if you're in an emergency situation, you don't want the situation where your standby team loses all its equipment trying to cross the border. There might also be, the perception that they're working up there and then they needed some sort of work visa. And then obviously that hasn't come up in BC, but it could potentially. So there's a lot of legal gray areas and unknowns. So ideally, I would want to station cryonics equipment in Vancouver. And I've been in talks with Alcor to get more equipment here because of that issue, which they acknowledge could be an issue.
Why did it get seized? What was the pretense for seizing the equipment?
Probably because the person in charge of that didn't quite fill out the paperwork properly. And they didn't know what it was, and it probably wasn't being shipped to what they recognize as a legitimate, medical establishment. So
yeah, and trying to explain the concept of cryonics to Border Patrol on the fly is probably not a fruitful endeavor. Probably doesn't work very often.
No, I mean, eventually I think they did get a kit to Ottawa, but the one that they tried to send, it wasn't an emergency situation, but the one they tried to take over that one time they never got it back. It's just like somewhere in the void. Whatever happens to things that don't make it through customs happen, like they didn't get it. So
now, assuming you had the proper equipment north of the border already, are there any concerns getting someone who's deanimated from Canada to one of the US cryo orgs? Can there be issues with directly transporting the body?
Yeah, there's definitely delays, and sadly, I would say the situation has actually gotten worse over the years. Probably because of COVID and just more delays, more restrictions, more paperwork. more administration. Because I've actually been in contact with CI, quite a number of times over the years, just because the Lifespan Society, we just help cryonicists. So we'll help Alcor members and CI members, whatever cryonicist needs help. So we had a case here at the height of COVID. It was March 2020. It was basically the worst time ever to deanimate. And this was actually a long time supporter of Lifespan Society, but then he had kind of dropped off as a member. But then we didn't realize he actually had mental decline. But when I look back at the situation, that's probably what happened, because he had cancer, but he didn't tell anybody. He didn't tell us. He didn't tell our organization. He didn't tell cryonicists that were actually much closer to him than I was. And it was just such a shock, because we get a phone call from his brother, who's an Alcor member, saying, look, my brother's has cancer. He's probably not going to make it. It's probably because he thought he could make it, and therefore he just thought he could beat the cancer, and he just neglected to tell anybody, because we were certainly not prepared for that situation. And then he did create a funeral arrangement with a funeral home. I probably shouldn't name that funeral home, because I'm not sure. I don't think they did that good of a job, but maybe they did the best they could given the circumstances. So he was actually stuck in Canada for, I think, 3 or 4 days on dry ice, hopefully like a sufficient amount of dry ice, but we weren't in a position to check at that time, but we probably should have. I'm just thinking, why did now I would check, but at the time I had a 1-month-old baby. So I think I was too preoccupied with staying safe from COVID and, trying to, check the dry ice situation, just keep the baby safe from COVID. So I was sort of still trying to, best navigate and phone the funeral director and tell them, put them in ice and make sure, you have enough dry ice. And just because they couldn't get a commercial flight, they halted all the flights. So it's not like cryonicists get a special flight to fly out. They just have to go with commercial flights that are available, and there were none. So I think he got to CI after 4 or 5 days. And I talked to CI, about it. And they just said that, we can't perfuse somebody if we get them after 48 hours. Like, there's no way. But there's some uncertainty between 24 and 48 hours when that perfusion becomes unavailable. So it's not like a hard limit or something. It just depends on the situation, the warm ischemia, the cold ischemia, and other factors. So at the moment, I don't know if any CI member can actually make it to CI within 48 hours. That's the main problem.
So would it be fair to say that any Canadian chronicists listening, this is good advice normally to move closer to the CSO, but seems that it would be prudent, doubly speaking, for Canadian chronicists to move before they need to closer to the CSO. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, and that's probably why there's more Alcor members in BC, I think, because back east there's all of these CI members, just because the flight is so much shorter between the Greater Toronto area and CI. So there's a geographic, significant geographic distance there that you'd be like, it's much closer. So it makes sense. So
Carrie, you might actually, just as an aside, something I thought of here, I don't know if this is legal, but you might have considered this. Hospice care typically in the US is 6 months. So if you're giving a guy diagnosis that doctor thinks you're going to die in 6 months, then you're provided hospice care. Is it, can a person who is given 6 months or less to live in Canada relocate to Phoenix or to Detroit for those last 6 months if they can afford hospice care or whatever care they want, right? Can they legally just relocate and sort of live out the rest of their days in the US so that when they deanimate, they're already right nearby?
Yes, I believe so. Because we had one lifespan member. But I haven't really personally looked into it. I'm just going on hearsay, which is probably not the best. But we had a older elderly Alcor member that said he was basically moving to Arizona, but he might have been a snowbird already, and he had the financial means, but not everyone has the, especially near the end of your life. I think near the end of most people's lives, their mental sharpness decreases. And I've been thinking about this a lot more lately, that I'm not going to be as mentally competent as I am now compared to when I'm in my 70s or 80s. So I should set things up properly now so that when my mental decline sets in, I'm not in a bad spot, like what happened to that CI member and friend of Lifespan Society and earlier supporter of Lifespan Society. And I just really am bothered by the fact that he's been in cryonics. You know, he was a legal activist too. He started writing letters to the government and the funeral industry, and you know, he was also involved in activism before I came along in the 2000s. So there's a whole bunch of cryonicists who I think that in BC there's actually a lot of communication between cryonicists because of this law, because we're able to come together to try to fight this thing. And that actually fostered a very like strong cryonics community in BC compared to some other places. Like, even though BC has fewer cryonicists than Washington, we still have a much stronger presence and community compared to Washington.
Now, given the Lifespan Society's albeit legal limited victory, and the fact that it just seems, at least to me, almost semi infeasible if I really wanted to do cryonics seriously as a Canadian citizen, is there any discussion or even chance that the Lifespan Society could eventually pivot to become an actual cryonic service organization, providing cryonic services directly to Canadians in Canada?
Yes, that's my ultimate plan, to actually become a suspended animation or international cryo medicine expert like organization type of thing. But that's going to take time, and I've only in the past year decided to sort of dedicate, you know, the next decade to making that possible, to setting that up properly.
Well, that's really good to hear, and I'm like to follow up with you in the future on that endeavor, because I that's obviously a huge undertaking, and as we know from other CSOs setting up, it is no easy feat. So in any way in which we can support you in that, we would be happy to.
I think Daniel, you mean standby SSTs, not CSOs, because what I think she's saying is she would provide standby stabilization and transport for, I guess, is it British Columbia or all of Canada, or
British Columbia, but we would
Okay.
also support local cryonicists, you know, trying to do that where they are. I mean, I'm just going to start with this area that I can actually handle, and then I am getting a lot of assistance. I'm in contacts with Alcor, CI, and also Emil from European Biostasis, and getting input from everybody to like just do this properly. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm just trying to set things up here. Just practically speaking, you know, people locally can respond much faster to a case. They don't have border delays. They don't have to check their equipment and like get their equipment. They don't have to get stopped at the border and be questioned about what they're doing in Canada, you know, and all these logistical issues that come up when you actually have a case. And people, you know, you can't always predict when people deanimate. So that's a massive issue.
And to clarify, did you mean, and I think this is what Max was alluding to when I misunderstood. So it would be mostly, you're not planning on storing people. It would be more of standby stabilization and transport versus versus actual storage with, you know, long-term storage within Canada.
Yeah, so Alcor and CI have really good patient care trust. They have storage figured out. This is a problem that doesn't need to be solved. So I have no interest in like becoming a full CSO. I'm only interested in becoming like a suspended animation for BC.
Makes a lot of sense. Yep.
Out of curiosity, have if somebody in Canada in British Columbia was signed up for tomorrow biostasis, what do you think would be the difficulties in getting them from BC to Switzerland rather than from BC into the United States? Besides the travel time, that's obviously longer, but that seems to me like actually potentially the least of the concerns. Whereas if the legal and paperwork and all that hassle could take days to clear, maybe it's a lot easier to get into Switzerland or such. And if so, that would be great.
So this is my perspective. The most damage happens when someone is in warm ischemia, and right now there's delays in somebody being legally declared dead, the death certificate, and also not being able to move them from the hospital very quickly. And there's all these really low-hanging fruits that we can tackle. We intend to do full field vitrification, and then once that occurs, full cryoprotectants and full perfusion of the brain and body. And then also being brought to dry ice temperatures. There's not that much damage between 20 hours on dry ice versus 10 hours or 30 hours on dry ice. I don't really see that as where things can go really wrong for a cryonicist in terms of brain death and cell preservation.
So whether they end up getting shipped off to Switzerland or the United or Arizona or Michigan, that's
once they're at dry
that's
ice
irrelevant. That doesn't matter.
That's not the biggest issue. Obviously, ideally, less time in dry ice, but once someone's at dry ice, there's not much decay happening. So
just as a small addendum to that, you might be interested in talking with Nikki Olson about that. I think she has some contrarian ideas about whether damage is still happening on dry ice or how much damage. I can't speak knowledgeably about it.
I do think cryonicists as a whole think that there's no damage once you're in dry ice temperature, which is untrue. There's definitely still damage, but 10 hours of dry ice versus 1 hour warm ischemia, the warm ischemia is going to be much worse anyways. So
certainly, yeah.
So unless Daniel, you had any other thoughts on that matter, but I wanted to move us over to the topic that we alluded to earlier, the topic of longevity versus cryonics, anti-aging versus cryonics. It seems to me like they're, in one sense, philosophically natural bedfellows, but in another sense, I've seen these two mindsets be at odds one with the other, because it seems to me, and I think this also happened to me as similarly as you said it happened to you, that if you believe that we're going to reach longevity escape velocity, any day now or easily within our lifetimes, then at least the impetus for cryonics becomes significantly lower, because then the only reason to have cryonics is in case you get hit by the proverbial bus that is always driving around hitting people. And so obviously a lot fewer people are going to be really willing to tackle the mountain of paperwork in order to simply mitigate the risk of being hit by the bus. So what are your thoughts on these two fields? Do you feel like they're at odds with one another? Do you feel like they're not? How do you see this?
So I have had, kind of I wouldn't say debates, they're more discussions, because I know some people that are older than myself who really believe that they're going to make longevity escape velocity, but I don't know if I'm right. I mean, it's possible that we do, but I just don't think our chances are great. But he's just so optimistic, and he says that life extension is like the airplane and cryonics is like the parachute. He hopes he doesn't need the parachute, but it makes sense that you would want a parachute, but he's going to trust the pilot. He's going to trust that his airplane gets him to the right destination, basically. So that was his analogy. And I thought about that. And I guess that we're kind of the party poopers for life extensionists. because we're a reminder that they might not make it, and people don't want to be told that, and they just want to cope however they want to cope.
It seems to me like for the average person, like myself, I'm not a scientist. I love science. I learn a lot about science. I read about science. I have a degree in philosophy of science, but I don't actively do science. Certainly, I'm not in the biotech field or anything else. So I have very little I can contribute to the anti-aging movement from that regard. And I don't have $1 billion to pour into one field or the other. So in my opinion, what's sort of going to happen with anti-aging is going to happen. There's a lot of money in the space. There are a lot of very intelligent people working on the problems. And so there's not much I can do personally, besides trying to stay alive for a nice long time, to improve my chances of reaching longevity escape velocity. However, cryonics is something that I can actively do and will affect personally whether or not I can someday get to see the far future. Because if I don't make cryonics arrangements, it ain't going to happen in the event that I need it to happen. So to me, it feels like, to use your airplane example, we're all already sitting on the airplane, right? Even if we're not involved in the longevity industry, right? We will still benefit from the fruits of its labor. Obviously, if you're in the industry, you might benefit from it a few years before everybody else who isn't. But the technologies, the therapies will once they're shown to be effective, will filter their way out to the rest of the population. Just like you don't have to have worked at Apple in order to end up owning an iPhone, except if you worked at Apple, maybe you get a chance to play with the prototype before everybody else. But putting on the parachute, that is a choice, and that's an important choice that every individual needs to think about and make. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, it seems to me like cryonics should be the focus at an individual level, even if research on anti-aging and such should of course be taking place to hope that we don't need to end up using cryonics. But certainly every person individually should be, I think, more focused on the need to be signed up for cryonics first and foremost before thinking about those other issues. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I agree. I mean, life extension enjoys a lot more publicity, funding, a lot more people are involved. Cryonics has kind of survived by like shoestring dream, a few people just sacrificing their life to the cause. It's not like a very well-funded field. It's just a field that somehow survived through charity and philanthropy. And I think that there should be a lot more resources and personnel in this field because it's very promising. I think we actually have the preservation part pretty much down. Like if people are found quickly, if they get declared quickly, if they get perfused quickly, their preservation is very good. That, to me, that's mostly solved. Maybe there's a few tweaks, but to me, that's mostly solved. What isn't solved is reanimation. Like that's going to be a very difficult problem in the future. But I think it's definitely worth putting more resources and minds and ideas into.
And do you have any broad scale ideas as to why cryonics is so underfunded relative to, I mean, I would imagine it's what, 100 or 1,000x less funding, maybe 10,000. It's just some ridiculous amount less than anti-aging research. Do you have any thoughts as to why that might be?
I wish I knew. It's so funny because people act like, why are you signed up for cryonics? And I'm like, why are you not signed up for cryonics? Like, people are weirded out that I'm signed up for cryonics, and I'm weirded out that other people are not, that they don't get it. Like it's like a double confusion, like for me, because to me, it's the most obvious thing in the world. So, but then I know that's such a weird viewpoint to have. So I'm not sure.
You don't have any inside scoops into why why so many wealthy benefactors seem to be far more interested in life extension than in cryonics?
I think more wealthy people will probably be interested in cryonics more in the future. For example, we have a billionaire, I'll just use Peter Thiel as an example because he's also a cryonicist, but he's been funding, experimental longevity research and development for over a decade. And he also, like, maybe should I speak to this more or not? Okay, I'm just going to get into it then. So basically, Peter Thiel has been, funding cutting edge life extension technology and therapies. And also, he had, a blood boy like 10 years ago before it became like a meme and on Silicon Valley. And it was probably parodying him actually. And has access to many therapies, doctors, interventions, scientists that the normal person would not have access to. But I just saw a picture of him. I saw him in an interview like last year, and I said, holy shit, he's aged a lot. He looks exactly like his age, despite having all the resources someone can even imagine. He's richer than like the richest kings in history. He has access to the most cutting edge anti-aging technologies. He had a blood boy. He has, endless resources, connections, everything. And yet this man has not managed to halt aging himself. Like, what chance do I stand as a normal person compared to Peter Thiel making it?
Yep.
Like, everyone has all this talk, but like, I just use my common sense and my eyes to see that this man looks his age. So
another example in that same vein would be Ray Kurzweil, who was famous for taking, I don't know, some hundreds of pills or something a day and like doing everything he could to stave off aging. And obviously he also has amazing connections, working in the capacities he has and at Google in the capacity he was. So I think he was like their chief scientist or something at Google. So obviously he'd have all the connections and all the people and he hasn't managed to do very much. So yeah, I mean, even the best that we can do with essentially unlimited knowledge and resources as what we have today is nowhere near sufficient to keep back the encroachment of time and aging.
Yeah.
So yeah,
this is actually right along the lines of what pushed me over the gap from life extension to cryonics, which is I think I had initially heard it from Aubrey de Grey about essentially, he was talking about longevity and the more traditional side, the commercial side of things with supplements. And he was like, you can do all the things you want to do, and that's all great, and you should do them. But at the end of the day, you're still only buying yourself at most 5 extra years. And when you look at it in that context, it really doesn't feel like a fruitful endeavor, at least on that kind of practical side, because you're gonna lose 5 years of all the things you're trying to do and then gain those 5 years back. And so I
have to be a bit contrary, because I think that increasing health span is very valuable. Having 70 years of healthy lifespan is a lot better than, having 50 years of healthy lifespan than 20 years of precipitous decline. So
mind you, I 100% agree with you. I guess I only use that as an example to show kind of the end product. Absolutely, all cryonicists should strive their best to not only increase their lifespan by whatever means possible, but to stay as healthy as possible, as long as possible, because on top of it just being good for you personally, it's also good to be healthy longer and die at a later date when cryonics services are more advanced technologically. And so for those reasons, yes, I'm not so much pushing back against the idea that that there's anything wrong with trying to stay healthy or taking all the supplements, which I've done and still do. Just that it felt like a shallow place to stop. So before I made the leap to cryonics, it was yeah, I'm gonna reach longevity escape velocity, maybe, and that seemed like a good goal, but if I didn't, those 5 extra years weren't worth the level of effort being kind of put into it versus putting your effort into cryonics, which feels like it's got a lot more bang to your buck, so to speak.
Daniel, is what you're saying you don't want to go through a lifetime of caloric restriction just to buy yourself another handful of years?
Yeah. I mean, I think the way I started viewing it was that you have to, what is it, Pareto's principle, 80-20, choose the kind of easiest, most valuable aspects of life extension and make sure you're consistent with those, and then kind of everything else cryonics, right? And ironically, over time, what I consider to be the most useful aspects of longevity have become less and less technical and more like common sense advice. And so, like, I talked to some younger people in the field, and they're talking about their nutritional supplement stacks and how how deep and detailed they are. And I'm like, do you ever sleep? Because sleep is like more important than all your stacks combined. And you seem like really high strung and stressed out. That's going to take some years off. You can't undo it with your stack. So like really like basic advice, like reducing stress, having clean air, and just balanced diet, and maybe on the lower end, but not like starving yourself so you're miserable all the time. And definitely reducing anxiety, which is, man, and talk about all the things we can do to like increase our life. Reducing anxiety is a big one, and worrying about cryonics and not dying is a really anxiety ridden kind of thing. It's kind of like a catch-22, because they're the people who don't care about not dying, these kind of older generation grandmas who don't think about death at all. They have like a leg up on longevity for that reason alone. It's just that they're not stressed all the time, kind of racking their brains about the future and what's going to happen, and their consciousness and these kinds of things. So it's kind of like a weird space to inhabit.
Well, Daniel, I hope this means that you stop. You try to worry less going forward and become more like one of those grandmas. That and probably you should stop with the pack of Marlboros a day. That one.
That one will relieve stress. I mean, I am a longevity practitioner. I do, intermittent fasting, 8-16 every day. And I'm probably on calorie restriction because of that. And I take 20 supplements a day. And I monitor my, my vitals constantly. If I'm not wearing an Apple Watch, I'm wearing Oura Ring. I check my VO2 max on my Apple Watch. I check my sleep score. I'm trying to maximize my sleep score. I have a air monitor called an Airway, and it checks my air quality. So I have like every gadget. I do every test. So I am very much, in the longevity space, trying to maximize my lifespan. And I don't find that stressful. I mean, the cost is, there's cost involved in that. And I actually don't find cryonics stressful. Well, I do sometimes, because I'm really far from where I want to be for capability. Like standby is a constant source of stress for me personally, but is also an opportunity for me to do something about it. So.
And do you feel like these things are going to get, I guess technology, of course, is going to improve as we get older, and the many instruments that we use to measure this kind of stuff are going to get better. But of course, as we get older, at some point we're going to start slowing down, and other aging factors are going to kick in that might limit our abilities to do this. Do you worry that at some point, many years from now, that you're gonna face some kind of decline, and when you do, you're not going to be set up properly to deal with it, or if so, how do you feel like you're going to set your life up to manage that?
So I think this is an issue that most cryonicists will face, because it's such a small field. You have somebody like Michael Darwin, he knows, cryonics A to Z, and there's very few people in the world that know every aspect of cryonics to the same level of detail as someone like Ben Best or Mike Darwin. And who is their successor? Like, who's going to take up the reins? And when I think about it, okay, so, you know, I can be a one-woman army here. I can just do everything here and get everything set up. But who's going to, I can probably preserve the elderly, you know, cryonicist, you know, because I know that I'm in control and I can do everything. But who's going to be preserving me when I get too old and too weak to do it myself? So, you know, that's where you have to set up a really strong organization and institution, and also, you know, train up the next generation before you need it. And also, you definitely don't want to be the first person to undergo your own procedure. Let's put it that way. I was talking to a wealthy individual who wanted to create their own cryonics company, and they just wanted it for their family. They said, "Oh, I only want to set this up for my family." I'm like, hang on, man. Do you really want to be the first? Like, do you want to set things up and be the first experimental person to undergo this? Like, obviously, you know, that's not the ideal situation. But if you're a new organization, you want to take on as many charity cases as possible to get good enough to be able to actually provide it professionally to people that pay, and then eventually to yourself. You want to build it up to the point where it's good enough for yourself. So that's my approach.
Yeah, I would imagine that maybe this person might consider this, but when I'm in those final years, I hope that by then there is essentially, I don't know what you think of it, like a cryonics ALF, right, an assisted living facility, a community space that you can continue to live your life as you enjoy it and all this stuff, but where you are surrounded by other cryonicists and all of the infrastructure and people that will be necessary to make sure things go as completely smoothly as they possibly can in those moments. And I hope I hope that exists by the time I need it, and I hope it exists as soon as possible so everybody else can take advantage of it. But I think that I think that many cryonicists would be willing to make such arrangements towards the end of their life if they could. But like you said, it becomes harder and harder to have the acuity or drive or mental fortitude or whatever to make that happen at that point. So it's something that would need to be in place and set up well before then.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I mean, this, I mentioned this case that was in 2020, March, height of COVID, CI member. He was actually in the process of signing up for Alcor before he ultimately passed away, because I guess he realized that maybe he didn't fully trust the funeral director to get him to where he needed to be in a fast way. Because, you know, in subsequent follow-ups with CI, I found out that maybe the funeral director he selected wasn't as fast as another one. So I after extensive, like, you know, analysis of the situation and what could have been better, you know, there was another funeral director that apparently gets people to the CI facility much faster than this other guy. But then he's like he's the only person that's willing to do it, first of all. And then he's not even in Vancouver most of the time, like he's in Portugal or something like that. So like, that's another logistical issue. So you need like lots of redundancies, like standby is just having lots of options and redundancies, so that when things go wrong, which they will definitely go wrong, then you need a option number 2 or option number 3. So it's very mundane. It's not intellectual work. It's just work that needs to be done and thought through, and it's mundane, but somebody needs to do it.
Yeah.
Now this is a bit of a personal topic that I've heard you speak about before. And if it's too sensitive, stop me at any time. That being said, I think your experience with this might be relevant to a lot of other chronicists. I'm aware your father had passed away not too long ago from a surprise heart attack. And from what I understand, he was potentially interested in cryonics, but not signed up. Could you talk a little bit about your struggles with that? Was your father interested in cryonics initially when he heard about it, or was it a struggle for you to get him on board?
Okay. So my father's always been, an open-minded, curious individual. And he was living his best life. He had a boat, he was still going around in his motorcycle at 71. He was still trading stocks and cryptocurrency and hiking up mountains. He had a full head of hair and he was just living his best life. And it was a real shock for everybody when he passed away. I mean, I had spoken to him about cryonics in the past multiple times just because I try to get my family signed up because, the more people you have to wake up with, the better it's going to be. Because I often get this question, the question is, well, if you wake up, you're not going to know anybody. And I said, well, I know all the people that are going to get frozen. So it's going to be fine. But I would obviously prefer my family to go with me. And one day he actually, because I brought this topic up over the years multiple times. And he said, yeah, I'd probably sign up for it if it was free. And I was thinking, I'm like, oh, okay. So maybe if I funded my father's cryopreservation, then he would actually do it, right? So maybe it was a financial thing. And he actually had the money to do it. He was just being cheap. But a lot of people are like that. They think they need the money for something else, but then actually they don't. They can't take it with them when they die. So I thought I had like an abundance of time to actually go through this because like, how do you navigate the social situation of like, okay, I'm interested in signing up, but I don't see any need for it because I don't think I'm going to die anytime soon because there's nothing wrong with me. And there was nothing like really wrong with him. I've known other people's parents that had like debilitating diseases. They were, barely walking in a wheelchair, clinging on to life for many years, or had like a triple bypass surgery with only like a 20% chance of survival. And all these dads outlived my dad. And I just scratched my head. I said, well, this is, part of me, I just went through like all these different emotions. I said, oh, I felt like angry that other people's dads outlasted mine because it seems so absurd that it would, because there was nothing wrong with him. And then all these other people are like outlasting him that I would have thought that would have went way before my dad went. So, I mean,
Yeah,
that's kind of a petty emotion, but there's all these emotions that one experiences when they're trying to process this.
yeah, I can imagine it. I can kind of relate with the feeling somewhat. My father died before I ever even knew about cryonics, but I always, is it weird? I also kind of just regret that I didn't know about cryonics to tell him about it in the past, which is a weird time traveling thing. And so over the years, it just bothered me because I feel like he might have been interested in kind of the same way, maybe not, jumping on it, but might have actually done it. And so, yeah, emotions can be very long lasting in that way. In terms of the kind of surprise of it, do you think this should be, or do you think the story of your father should kind of serve as a wake up call to a lot of maybe people straddling the fence of cryonics who tell themselves that, I'm healthy or I have enough time? I think if by paraphrasing Emil Kenzior here, where he said cryonics is kind of one of the most important things you should do right now, but the easiest to put off till later. So yeah,
Yeah, I think that most people don't think they're gonna die. That's part of the reason why they don't sign up. But for someone that was lucky enough to find out about cryonics in my 20s, I realized the benefits of signing up early and how much cheaper it was because I paid into a universal whole life insurance and I didn't have any health issues. So I could pay off my entire policy in 13 years. And I just saw that as a like, I just want to have all my ducks in a row. And I said, oh, I didn't really have an answer to what I wanted when I passed away, but now this is solved. Like I can plan my life and I also plan my death. And it's just one giant green check mark, get this done. And I don't have to worry about it anymore. And I thought it was some sort of turnkey operation where everything was solved I was very optimistic when I first signed up. I didn't realize there was any problems with the cryonics. I thought that naively, I thought everything was solved, everything would go smoothly, and then like life happens, and then you see what happens to other people that don't, have everything set up properly, and they don't get the best preservation. And then you start to notice more problems with your CSO or with cryonics as an industry, and the gap between what's ideal and reality. So I was just going in there like fully idealist, thinking that everything was fine.
Yeah, it's this weird line that I think we all have to straddle, but the cryo orgs are straddling, which is, do you tell prospective customers, about how many issues there are, about how many things can go wrong, and potentially scare them away, or do you kind of give them all the information and hope that they're gonna kind of jump in a deeper way than they currently are? Because I think too many regular folks and extremely wealthy folks are just sitting on the sidelines thinking that they have their contract and they're signed up and that it's all going to be good. But anybody in the industry, anybody kind of following closely, realize very quickly that there's 100 things that could go wrong, despite anything else you think you've set up. I mean, with your father, and then very recently, with these kind of sudden scenarios that come out of nowhere, with Ben Best, who had a stroke recently, and luckily he's recovering. But from that experience, are there anything or any specific steps that you would advise cryonicists to take, kind of in advance of preventing one of these kind of sudden heart attack, strokes, or any kind of sudden death?
Well, if only we had one of those life monitoring devices that cryonicist has been seeking the holy grail for the past 30 years or something like that, where it would detect if somebody passed away and then send out a message to a local person that could help them with the cooling process, and their CSO and everybody to kind of mobilize. But ideally, you don't want to inform the CSO as soon as you pass away. You want to give them time so they can pack their equipment up, at least 24 hours notice minimum, for them to actually get there. So if somebody knows that they have a health issue that could end their life, then they should absolutely just move next to Alcor or CI and stay in a hospice until they pass away. But whether or not this is a realistic thing that people actually do, it's actually like in the minority of cases, is from listening to the previous podcast. But it actually makes sense, because I would never choose to voluntarily live in Arizona.
You were there recently, right?
Yes, I was there recently.
It's hot down there.
It's too hot. I can't handle it. Just the environment is just so triggering for me personally. And I would only go there if I was like faced with actual death. So
maybe a place to live out one's final days, but not before that.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is a question that I ask everyone who is higher on estrogen than testosterone when they come on this show. My question is, why do you think there are so few women relative to men in the cryonics endeavor? And is this actually a problem? Should anything be done about this? And if so, what? Or should we just sort of not worry about this?
I like to think that there's more women involved in cryonics now than in the past, but maybe that's not the case. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I signed up for cryonics on my own. But if people can get their whole family to sign up for cryonics, then maybe the initial idea isn't appealing, but then once they learn more about it, like once everybody in the family learns more about it, then there would be a natural, natural regular ratio, because like most families are, you know, half women, half men. So eventually it'd become closer to 50-50, even if women don't seek this type of thing out for themselves. They might grow interested in it if presented with the right information in the right way. Like say it was presented in a way, instead of like radical futurism and science fiction and all this stuff, it was just presented as a way to protect their family or stay with their loved ones. Or maybe if it was a slightly different presentation, it would be different. But I have no idea. It's not like Cryonicists are great marketers. So
Yeah, Cryonics is that's certainly one of the biggest problems they're having. Although, of course, tomorrow biostasis and Emil are I think pioneering a change in that what has been the poor marketing legacy of Cryonics over the decades. But remains to be seen how well it works out. But it seems like they're changing that. What projects right now are you currently working on? You spoke, of course, about what you're hoping to do with the Lifespan Society. What else are you working on that's related to, of course, to the field of cryonics that you'd like to tell folks about?
So I think that like my strategy with Lifespan Society is sort of like big tent life extension. You know, anyone interested in life extension could join our society. Because our society was kind of dead for a couple years because of COVID and people being uncomfortable with meeting in person. And also I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, so I was quite busy with my children and too busy to really put that much time into it. And other people got busy. The pace of life seems to change for a lot of people in their 30s. In our 20s, we felt like we just had so much opportunity and freedom and time to commit to our society, like myself and the rest of the board. But now that we're in our 30s, we just all seem extremely busy for some reason. We don't know why. We're like, how did we all get so busy? So we decided to hire a student intern to create a life extension club at UBC. And that will get fresh blood into our organization and people with time and dedication and passion, hopefully, for the field of life extension. And they can keep the society growing. And hopefully, if we get more people that are interested in life extension, a smaller percentage of those persons would also be interested in cryonics. So say, for example, we put a conference up with 200 people. We have life extension popular life extension speakers. And then we have somebody like Keegan do a presentation on cryonics, and then we can kind of capture the point, maybe 1% of people that might be interested in signing up for cryonics. And also, if we have more equipment and actually an emergency standby vehicle here, then we would attract more attention, because then it will be more tangible. We could say, hey, this is our emergency response vehicle. Here's all our equipment. We have a CI Ziegler case, like it's a metal container for shipping people. We have a Lucas Thumper 1. We have sodium citrate. We have heparin. We have all this, equipment. And I'm also in the process of buying TerraSem's kit, which is like more updated equipment. And then I'm going to replace the intermediate kit that we bought back in 2014 materials with the materials that we get from TerraSem, just to keep our equipment updated. And then ultimately hire, somebody for standby, like a paramedic or nurse, to actually like work on contracts with us. But that's like down the road. So I'm running into like, this is really mundane, but I can't seem to find a parking spot with like high enough clearance for an ambulance or a sprinter for, the cryonics response vehicle. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Mundane, but still a life or death issue.
Yes.
Somebody needs to find a better parking spot or a smaller, shorter vehicle for this.
Yeah. But if you want your whole operation to run out of a van, it needs to be a pretty big van. Because like office space, I don't know if you people are aware, but Vancouver is some of the most expensive real estate in the entire world, and rents are insane. It's comparable to New York, Manhattan, it's one of the least affordable cities. So we're running into extra logistical issues with office and storage space and vehicle space and everything. Because to buy a parking spot in downtown, you have to pay like 50 grand or 70 grand to buy a parking spot. And the like parking spot wouldn't even be, good enough for the thing we're trying to store either, because the clearance wouldn't be high enough. I mean, tops out at like 6.4. So
There's no way to store it outside of the city limits or outside of that area.
I'm looking at, the slightly outside the city limits too, but then you want the stuff to be close to where most people are living. So
if moving towards the end, if you've been listening to our podcast recently, I'm sure you're aware of our overrated, underrated segment.
Mhm.
So if you don't mind, we're gonna shift to that, and so we'll just ask you a bunch of short topic, or we'll mention a bunch of short topics, and you just let us know if you think it's overrated or underrated.
okay.
So we will start with adult coloring books. Overrated or underrated?
Underrated, especially for people that are immunocompromised and can't really go out and do other activities.
Okay. Overrated or underrated being a real estate agent?
Oh, overrated.
Yeah. Why?
Not something you would do again.
Well, I'm still kind of doing it, but I realized that I don't know. I thought the job would be like less demanding than it was, but you're dealing with people's like biggest financial decision in their life, so it's pretty high stakes. Like the average, price for a 2-bedroom in Vancouver is like, 850,000. That's like someone's entire life savings. So even if something happens, like the market goes down, like, and it's not your fault, people will still blame you for anything that happens, right? So
Sounds like a high stress job.
Yeah, well, especially when you're a caring person. So
yeah, I actually
I'm
care about the outcome of their decision. Maybe I shouldn't, but I mean, a lot of people don't. So, and also I really hate how the industry is set up. All the incentives are misaligned. Like you're not incentivized to be careful and like considerate realtor. Like you're not incentivized to tell them what's wrong with the property. You're only incentivized to like close your deal as quickly as possible. And that's just like against my moral belief. So, but then most realtors just have to put food on the table. So even if it's like a complete dump, they'll just be like, it's fine, buy it.
so many people with house hunting PTSD right now, reliving their trauma. Overrated or underrated poker as a way to supplement income?
Overrated.
Overrated.
Yeah,
So,
I think it's a terrible way of supplementing income for fun, sure, but I don't know. Professional poker players, they run up against a lot of issues. It's a just grueling work. They have to play, 10 tables at once, and now they have to defeat bots as well. I've known a lot of professional poker players in my life for some reason. I don't know why. And it just seems like a really bad way to live life. Like I would hate to be like just glued to the screen for 10 hours a day. I would just despise that life. So
and what is it about poker and cryonics? I've in my experience, it seems to be there are a higher than average amount of cryonicists who have tended to gravitate towards poker in their past lives.
really, I
Yeah.
didn't know that. I don't know. I think I had some, let me think. There's two very interesting games, I think, for intelligent people. One is chess and one is poker. Now, chess is sort of there's like, I think there's a limited number of moves. There's a fixed number of moves.
10 trillion or something
10
along those
trillion,
lines.
but with poker, there isn't. With poker, there isn't. And I think poker is more like, I had a good saying about what the differences I saw between these two games and like what types of people gravitated towards one or the other. but I can't. That's escaping me right now. So I just
Okay.
like poker because of the psychological component
Yeah.
and the math.
I would say if I had to say what, I mean, not that there's probably many cryonists who also love chess, but I would say there's a adventurous kind of risk-taking aspect to poker that might jive with chronicist's kind of contrarian worldview. Not so different than kind of how we were discussing before. It's a very adventurous endeavor, and kind of poker feels like there's a lot more risk than chess as a
I would
game.
I would just say risk management and thinking about things, statistics. Those are two qualities that are helpful in becoming a cryonicist.
Mhm. There's also money on the line, so that makes it more fun.
Yeah.
There's more higher stakes here.
What about life in Canada versus what you perceive life to be like, south of the border down here?
I actually wanted to become American when I was younger, but now that I'm older, I'm happy to be Canadian. Just because I see, too much. I'm not saying there's not any social issues in Canada, but there seems to be like a higher amount of like divisiveness and political problems with identity politics and safety in general. I mean, I'm not saying, it's right, or I'm not trying to, take anybody's side, but, just seeing the school shootings, I don't know what the cause of it is, or who's at fault or why or anything, and seeing the riots from Black Lives Matter and just like cities on fire and like race riots in general. Like this is something that, we have the privilege of not really having to deal with. When I go to the Wikipedia page, race riots in Canada, I get this like really short list, and then race riots in America, it's just like, oh, I'm still scrolling. I'm scrolling and scrolling. It's like, okay, I don't really want to. It seems like there's more social problems, and I don't know what the cause of it is. I have no explanation or solution. I don't know. I don't want to point any fingers at anybody. It just seems like there's more problems. And also, I think that with global warming, Canada will be a better place to be. And there's more ecological problems in the States.
I would also say the U.S. is following along those lines. It's not just social and it's governmental problems. I think the structure of our government is just poorly suited to the present political situation. People are, like you said, too divided, and that's causing a lot of problems south of the border. But at least it currently tends to be warmer down here, and before global warming takes us too far, we have that going. Unless you're in Arizona, in which case it's too hot. Actually, in Texas, it's too hot right now too.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that more places in Canada will become more habitable, and there's going to be more desertification of various swaths of the United States, and more water shortages, and ecological issues and natural disasters and whatnot. So
look to buy real estate in Nunavut. Nunavut, is it pronounced Nunavut, right? That's that one of those really northern province, like northeastern province of Canada or whatever.
Yeah, none of it.
None of it. No, there you go.
None of it. Yeah.
Who's got more interesting geology though?
Oh, that's hard to say. I mean, they're both very interesting. I mean, I would say that the Arctic is less explored, so that's where I would want to go explore once cryonics is solved. Like cryonics standby is solved, I wouldn't want to go to like Baffin Island or Nunavut to sort of explore just for fun, collect some rocks.
So final overrated or underrated, the cryosphere has a place to connect with fellow cryonicists and do cryonics community, at least as it in relation to places like Facebook or Reddit or other places where one can find cryonicists and connect.
Underrated. I just, maybe I'm just saying that because I just love the
Good answer.
cryosphere so much. I mean, maybe there's no reason behind this, but I just love the cryosphere. So
What a self-serving overrated, underrated, Max.
Yeah. Just it's complete coincidence. It happens to be the question on which we will end this podcast.
great.
So, thank you, Carrie, for coming on, and we look forward to seeing you there on the cryosphere, as we look forward to seeing everybody else who is listening to this episode. And thank you very much for joining us today on the Cryonics Underground.
Thank you for having me, and that was a blast. So I hope to hear more episodes in the future.